Hello everyone. The purpose of this video is to basically give you an understanding of the function Vlookup to help you to be clear as to how to make use of it and more specifically how to use it in terms of your SBA for information technology. So to begin, we would know that every function has a syntax, basically a structure as to how it needs to be created. So I'll be giving you a rundown of that structure. So it's the VLOOKUP function, and the very first argument in that structure, I would usually call it a lookup value. The second argument is called, or we can basically call it the range of data as to where to look for the lookup value. Now, once that value has been found, you would want to select a column in that range or of data. So you're basically going to insert a column number and then simply for your last argument to indicate whether the data is sorted or not sorted. So those are your four arguments which your VLOOKUP function will contain. Now to give us a idea as to how the VLOOKUP function works, I'll create a simple table. So the very first column is the item number, and we're going to create some items, cheese stick, a Dixie, a Bigfoot. So we have some items here in this table, and the cost of these items, just roughly a cheese stick is 160, Dixie's 100, and a Bigfoot is, we're going to say 180. Now, think of the VLOOKUP function as basically being used to link a piece of data into another cell. So say for instance, this cost data, if we were to create this table anywhere else, we could copy the data, paste the data anywhere else in our Excel, and we have the data. But what if the data changes now in the original location? Then that means we have to look for all other instances where we have that data and update it manually. The VLOOKUP can help us to update that information automatically. So imagine this table here as being our original data. So this, we're running a business basically. This is our original data where we're gonna have like an inventory. And in another sheet now, imagine this other sheet being our sales sheet. So we're gonna have the same item number, and we're gonna create the same information item. We don't necessarily have to put back costs, but we can use an amount. So I'm gonna leave item blank for now because we're gonna use VLOOKUP for that. Just gonna randomly insert some amount of items. So those are the amounts there, and then we're gonna have a total column. So we're gonna create a VLOOKUP function to basically link the item that we have in this main table over into our sales table. So basically, if the item is to change, it will also automatically update in our secondary table. So how do we do that? How do we create the VLOOKUP function? Well, I already gave you the syntax. So the first thing I would advise is that you name your range. Now, you could select and highlight your range, but if you do that, you would not be able to autofill unless you would have used a $sign method to ensure absolute addressing. Now, the name range method is actually the other method of absolute addressing, so that's why it's better to name our range. So we're going to simply name this range here. So to name any range or to name any cell, you highlight the area that you basically want to name. So in this case here, I'm highlighting this table here to name this range of data that we have here. And that's basically A3 to A6, C6. So once the area has been highlighted, we can go to the name box and type in an appropriate name. So in this case here, I'm going to name it items because it refers to my items, and then I'm going to select OK. Now, while we're on this topic here of naming a range, just say for instance, we would have named it something and we named it incorrectly. Maybe we spelled it incorrectly, or we want to change the name. If I actually go back to this name box and type something else, just say randomly Fox, and hit enter, okay, this is interesting. Seems the latest version of Microsoft Excel has updated that feature. Now, usually you would not have been able to change the name in the name box, but I'm glad they would have updated this feature here. Or is it two names here? Either way, what I wanted to show you guys is that if you go to the Formulas tab, and you select Name Manager, in this box here is where you can delete names, because even in the name box, you would not have been able to delete that name, or you would not have been able to edit it. That's where this box comes into play. So if there's any mistake, if you need to make any changes, you would go to the name manager box. So if I want to edit the name, I would select it, select edit, and I can change the name here. Now say for instance, I no longer want Fox, I can delete it, and now I only have one name there for that particular range. Great, so that's how we would name our range and how we can edit it if that need arises. So after we would have named our range, now we can go ahead and create our Vlookup function in the other table. So please remember we are linking the item name for now. So under the item column, the very first cell, we're going to start our Vlookup function. We're going to start with equal Vlookup, open brackets, and remember the first argument, it's the lookup value. What are we looking for? Now, what you're usually looking for in a Vlookup function is some sort of data in the very first column of that range. Why the very first column? Simply because Vlookup only looks to the right-hand side. It does not look to the left-hand side. So just say, for instance, the table started here in the shaded area. If I selected column E, it does not look at column D, C, B, and A. It only looks to the right. It does not look to the left-hand side. So usually, when we're using the Vlookup function, it's the very first column we are working with, because that's the first column, and that way we'll be able to look at everything else inside of that table. So we're basically looking for something that is similar among the two tables. So I'm looking for item number inside of this table here. So going back to the function, equal Vlookup, and I'm looking for this item number here. Now I could type the number 1, but usually once the data is inside of a cell, we can or we should use that cell name, because once again, if the data inside the cell changes, it will automatically update in the function. So we select the name of the cell, comma, to separate our arguments. Now notice the second argument, table array. This is the range of data. Now look here, we could select and highlight the table if we wanted, but we want to avoid that because of the issue you will get with relative addressing. We want to make it absolute so that when we're using autofill, it is going to copy itself correctly. So this is why we had to name the range before we came into creating the function. So we're going to type the name of the range, items, then we're going to select comma. Now, the column index number. Inside of that range, which column number do we want to link? Now, if we remember, item is the second column in that range. So we simply have to type the number 2, comma, and then the final argument is whether that table of data is sorted or not sorted. So if it is sorted, we put true. If it is not sorted, then we put false. So usually, if you don't know, even if you do know, if you use false, it will give you the correct answer. Only if the table is sorted, then you can use true to get the correct answer. So we're going to select false as a safeguard because I'm not sure whether it's sorted or not. And that there is our Vlookup function. So we can now autofill and it will give us the rest of information and correctly change the cell name so that we get the correct function for getting the correct values for the rest of the rows. So to go it over again, the very first value is your lookup value. What are you looking for? In this case here, we're looking for something that is common between the two tables. This case, it's the item number. Like I said, we could have typed it, but it's safer to use what is inside of a cell. Because say, for instance, I change this 3 to a 1, look what happens, it automatically changes. So that's the power of using cell names. So what are you looking for? We're looking for whatever's inside of A4. Where are you looking for it? What is your range of data? I named that range items, so we type in that name there. Now in that range, what column do you want to link? Basically, I want to link the second column of data. And then lastly, whether that data is sorted or not. And that is the Vlookup function. Now we're going to create that Vlookup function for the total column and at the same time use it inside of a formula. How do we do that? Same Vlookup function equal, but in this case, I'm going to be linking the cost column. So that's the third column. So let's go through it because I'm going to be creating a formula to calculate the cost, which is in the other sheet, with this amount here to get me my total. Let's go. So equal Vlookup, open brackets. Once again, my lookup value. What am I looking for? I'm looking for the value that is inside of A2. Usually we'll work with the information that is in a row, comma, my table array, my range of data, or simply where am I looking for the data? I'm looking for it inside of the range called items that I would have named, comma, then what column number do I want to link? Do I want to connect? I want to link the third column in that range, comma, is that range sorted? I'm not sure. I'm going to type false, close brackets, enter. And notice I have the cost here. I'm going to autofill, and I have the cost for the rest of items here. But notice, this is only the cost that has been linked here. I still need to calculate my total. So I'm going to go back into my formula. Now, how do we carry out the calculation? How do we create a formula now with our function? Well, what we need to do is basically treat this entire function as a value. Because this function here is basically one entity, we can treat it as though it's one value. Imagine if it's just the value 2. Let's just look at a simple example of a formula. If we did 2 multiplied by this amount here, as a simple formula, 2 multiplied by cell C2, we have our answer there, 8. The same concept. Imagine this entire function here as being a value. That's how we use functions in our calculations. Just treat it as though it's a value, and you simply continue the formula now with your operator. So here now we're going to add our operator at the very end, asterisk, and then we're going to select the cell that we want to multiply it by. In this case, it's going to be C2, and we hit enter. And notice we have our total there. Let me just clear this here and autofill. And notice we now have our correct total. So let me turn on the formula view. For those who want to know how you turn on the formula view, to turn on the formula view, you hit Control and the key above Tab at the same time. Hold Control, CTRL, and the key above Tab, that's called a tilde key, and you will enter formula view. So notice our Vlookup function, as we autofill, it basically creates the appropriate function, the appropriate formula for our calculation here.